We're very excited to have Sarah Allaben with Mount Adams Resource Stewards with us. She will be going over a recap of the TREX event, which was amazing. It is a training exchange program that happened out here in the Columbia Gorge, and quite a few Columbia Land Trust staff got to participate, including Lindsay. Actually, and all of us got to go for a day, and I got to use a drip torch, and it was the best.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, so my name is Sarah Allaben. I'm the Fire Adapted Communities Coordinator at Mount Adams Resource Stewards, or MARS as I'll be referring to it. If you're not familiar with MARS, we're a small community-based nonprofit based up in Glenwood. We do a variety of forest restoration, fuels management, wildfire risk mitigation, various other work kind of in the South Mount Adams region. And I'm going to be going over TREX as well as another initiative that we're working on right now to expand the use of prescribed fire in this area on all sorts of lands, not just federal, not private, but all lands. And sorry, this is a PDF, but hopefully it's big enough for you all to see. I'll go over this pretty quickly because I know a lot of you are pretty well versed in this, and we heard from Rick as well. But just wanted to go over the background of why prescribed fire is so important in the East Cascades region. Prescribed fire is a management tool where we're applying fire to the ground in a controlled and planned way to meet specific objectives, management objectives. And I laid out some of the most important ones for the East Cascades region here. Forest health and resiliency, promoting and improving wildlife habitat, promoting cultural resources, which brings up the other important point that prescribed fire as a management tool is not new in any way. It's been used for millennia by Indigenous people for their own objectives, including the Allaben Nation up where I'm based, in Warm Springs down here, and many other tribes. And then, as Rick talked a lot about, one key or two key objectives that we're using prescribed fire for today are hazardous fuels reduction and in turn reducing the risk of catastrophic wildfire to our homes and communities. And kind of importantly, the reason why prescribed fire is so effective and kind of the most important management tool to meet these objectives is because, as you all know, we live among fire adapted landscapes, landscapes that evolved with and are adapted to fire. So I just wanted to put in this nice map of just historical fire regimes. So how frequent and severe wildfire or fire was typically entering these landscapes in the Pacific Northwest. And you can see where we are, there's a lot of red, which is indicating historical fire regime group 1, which is low to moderate severity fires that were happening very frequently. Every 0 to 35 years is what they say there. I think a lot of this area probably more in the range to 5 to 15, 7 to 15 years. So you can see there's just a wide swath of land here that is adapted to very frequent low intensity fire, and we suppressed it for over a century. So when we're trying to meet these objectives, it's or where we're seeing issues with these kind of with forest health and lack of wildlife or degraded wildlife habitat and hazardous fuel buildup, it's because we've lacked the fire that these landscapes need, and prescribed fire is just a really important way to restore those conditions. So given the extensive need for prescribed fire in this landscape that crosses all sorts of borders between federal land, state land, private land, tribal land, MARS is pretty committed to expanding the use of prescribed fire in this region. One way we do that is by burning on our own lands. So MARS manages about 1,800 acres of community forest, mostly around the community of Glenwood. And we've used prescribed fire on a lot of that land in the past many years, I think starting in 2016. This is an example of a burn from last year. So that's one way that we can steward the lands that we have a lot of control over, but we're also really working to expand prescribed fire and make it more accessible to people across many different land ownerships and partners. So as we're thinking about how to expand that use of prescribed fire, we look at what barriers there are to using prescribed fire in this landscape and why it's not used more. I have Washington here because this is kind of a list compiled by the Washington DNR, but of course this applies to Oregon as well in similar landscapes. So some key barriers to prescribed fire include policy and regulations, more and more accessible training opportunities, definitely more collaboration and cross-boundary burning across different land managers, building a robust workforce outside of the fire suppression workforce that can do prescribed fire, and then expanded public outreach and education to kind of build that social license and that public acceptance of prescribed fire. So, as was alluded to, one way that we wanted to address some of these needs was by hosting a TREX. TREX, or Prescribed Fire Training Exchange, is a model of prescribed fire training that was initiated about 15 years ago when the Nature Conservancy had a partnership with the Forest Service. And the training model has since kind of expanded and spread since then. I think there have been over 100 of them, mostly in the West, but across the country. And the idea is that you bring together participants, fire practitioners, academics, private landowners, nonprofits, lots of different people, bring everyone together for 2 weeks for a kind of immersive prescribed fire learning experience with field trips and guest speakers and a lot of burning as well, to try to kind of boost capacity in that local area to burn a lot of acres, but also just have these variety of different perspectives talking with each other and sharing their knowledge to try to increase prescribed fire at a large scale. So for us, this was the Columbia Gorge TREX. This is the first time we hosted it back in October. It was a 12-day long training. It was hosted by Mars, but we had a leadership team that included folks from the Nature Conservancy, the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, Washington DNR, and then we had about 35 participants coming from all over, mostly Oregon and Washington people, but we had some Canadians, Colorado, California, and they all came together to Glenwood, where most people were camping out at Draper Springs, where Mars is headquartered, and working together for that 2-week long period. I'll talk a little bit more about what we did. So as I mentioned, the idea of a TREX is to have a wide variety of learning experiences and both burning and just kind of networking. A lot of the TREX ended up looking like the bottom left photo there, which is the big tent that we had set up. It was quite rainy, especially for the first week, unfortunately. And that pole that you see on the left is a propane heater. That gives you any sense of the conditions that people were camping in. But we had a great group of people who were really adaptable and made the best of the experience. But we had lots of guest speakers. We had field trips out to sites that had been recently burned or wildfire impacted sites. Up on the top left photo is an image of people practicing fire ignition patterns by lighting up some straw bales. And then it did ultimately dry out enough that we could actually get some burning in as well. So both pile burning and broadcast burning or kind of underburning across landscapes. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But yeah, the idea was really to just have both boost the capacity to do burns that otherwise we wouldn't have been able to without 35 people in this region. But again, also just sharing knowledge and helping people build skills. So as I mentioned, our participants came from kind of a diverse geographic region, but they were also coming from a lot of different educational and organizational backgrounds, ranging from Forest Service firefighters to people on local fire departments. We had a couple of folks from the Yakama Nation Fuels Management Program. We had private contractors. We had quite a few people from nonprofits like Columbia Land Trust and Mars and the Nature Conservancy. So it was contrary to what you often see on prescribed fire operations, where it's just one agency or maybe a couple, like a federal and a state agency working together. It was really cool to have people from the federal side seeing what it looks like to work in fire at a nonprofit or vice versa. So some other outcomes from the TREX, we were able to provide some National Wildfire Coordinating Group training to folks who are working on task books. If you're not familiar with NWCG, it's kind of the federal system that organizes qualifications and skills for firefighting and prescribed fire. So for people who are working on task books, we could give them a way to improve their qualifications and skills. But also importantly, we were able to provide some training for people who aren't associated with that system, whether they work at a nonprofit or they're just someone interested in prescribed fire. Some of the Columbia Land Trust people here were able to join without being red carded, without being an NWCG participant. And that's also a really important experience because often the NWCG system can be a barrier for people to get into prescribed fire. So some of those people came for the whole trek, some just came for a burn day or two. And despite the rain, we were able to get some burning done in about 173 acres. And these included Forest Service lands on the Columbia Gorge National Scenic Area. We burned on the Mount Adams Community Forest, managed by Mars. We burned with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And then most excitingly, in my opinion, we were able to help Columbia Land Trust do the first ever burn on their property, which was really fun, 47-acre burn, hopefully the first of many. So it was really exciting to, again, like have the capacity here to help them get over that hurdle. And so hopefully create some momentum into the future. And kind of related to that, I think a big part of TREX is just helping promote this all lands approach. This is a figure from Washington DNR's 20-year strategic forest health plan for Eastern Washington. Probably, again, very similar to Oregon. You can see there's restoration need really split across many different land ownership types. And a lot of that active restoration need can be fulfilled by prescribed fire, among other management techniques. But it is clear that we need to be working together. We need to be collaborating. So it's not just a Forest Service priority. It's not just a private or industrial thing. It really needs to be an all lands approach. And TREX is something that can help people build the relationships to promote that collaboration into the future. So, I mean, even from Mars's perspective, the TREX helps build upon or create new agreements between Mars and the Nature Conservancy, Mars and Yakima Nation, Mars and the Forest Service to just continually promote and facilitate prescribed fire and help us help each other, not create these barriers where it's like hard for Mars staff to work on a federal burn or vice versa. So just, yeah, creating that collaboration. And that's kind of a segue to another initiative that we're working on to promote prescribed fire, specifically on private lands, particularly small private landowners. I want to talk a little bit about that as well. So going back to these barriers or these needs to increase prescribed fire in Washington, when you're looking at small private landowners, there's often a lot more barriers than just these. For example, more clarity about liability in prescribed fire and more protection for liability. As I kind of talked about before, including more training opportunities outside the NWCG federal system. A lot of private landowners don't have access to the equipment that they need to do a burn safely, or they need technical assistance or funding support. So in partnership with Columbia Land Trust, as well as Sustainable Northwest, we are currently standing up the Mount Adams Prescribed Burn Association to address virtually all of these barriers for small private landowners to use prescribed fire. So PBAs are a model that started in the Great Plains with ranchers and farmers kind of just casually burning with one another, but has since kind of formalized, and there are lots of PBAs popping up around, especially in California. This is the first one in Washington, but there's a couple others that are currently popping up as well. So the kind of point of a PBA is it's a grassroots coalition of private landowners, nonprofit land managers, non-agency land managers and interested community members all trying to help one another use prescribed fire safely. Through the PBA, we're able to sponsor trainings and workshops. For example, back in last May, we hosted a Learn and Burn, which some of you were here for. This was kind of like a mini TREX, more tailored toward non-agency people. And it was just 3 days long, where we had some guest speakers, we had classroom learning, and then we ended it with a 50-acre burn on the community forest. So a great way to just get people's toes wet and help them develop the skills to use prescribed fire on their own lands. The PBA also manages an equipment cache that people can loan out for use on their own lands, which we're continually trying to build and get more equipment for. And then also serves as an advocacy group to try to promote or to try to address the policy and regulatory barriers that are facing people trying to use prescribed fire on private lands. And kind of in a more practical sense, we see the PBA as being a one-stop shop for a private landowner in every stage of the timeline of planning and implementing a prescribed burn, whether that's a site visit or a consultation, helping write a burn plan and review it, navigating the permitting process, providing equipment for unit prep and for implementing burns, recruiting volunteers to help on burns, or Mars has a stewardship crew that is skilled in prescribed fire and fuels management that can assist on PBA burns, providing help with fire effects monitoring, and then kind of long range planning as far as what other fuels work might be needed, and maybe additional entries of prescribed fire into the future. So thinking about next steps for all of you, if you're interested in the PBA, I didn't mention, but we don't have an exact geographical region for the PBA, but we kind of see it as Clickitat County and any surrounding county, adjacent counties, and that can definitely go across the river. So if you're at all interested in the PBA, we're actually having an informational meeting about it next Monday. I put flyers on the table you can grab if you want. Just across town at the fire department, where we'll give a lot more information about the PBA and also just be collecting feedback about what people want this to look like and how it can best serve this community. And then the other thing I would say is if you want to learn more about TREX, or if you want to be a partner in our future TREX, we're hoping to make this an annual thing. We'll probably have it again next fall. So if you are a land manager, this is a great way to both learn about prescribed fire and have more resources available to you to do a burn. So you're welcome to reach out to me or sign up for the email list for the Washington Prescribed Fire Council or the PBA email list, which you can do by contacting me. And there'll be more information about future TREX and PBA events through that. And that's pretty much all I have. Any questions?